Chinese philosophy has an interesting attitude toward rebellions, coups and uprisings. From this unique point of view, when a ruling dynasty becomes tyrannical, out of touch, or simply outmatched by stronger opponents, it is the mandate of heaven for it to be replaced with a more worthy ruler. It is a philosophy that rewards the strength of a conqueror and believes that it is a righteous pursuit to overthrow and replace a weak and complacent government. By the start of the 19th century, the ruling Qing dynasty had been in power for around 200 years after defeating the previous rulers and claiming that heavenly mandated position of power. The Qing were once a loose collection of far north nomadic people who were usually content to just raid villages and take anything that wasn't nailed down, but after hearing the news of China's ruling party being ripe for replacing, they put those skills to work, and the Qing dynasty was born. However, as the old saying goes, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. The Qing would initially have a very successful time in power, expanding the Chinese empire to the largest in its history, stretching as far as Vietnam and Cambodia, regions that previous rulers have only dreamed of taking. However, by the early 1800s, the Qing dynasty had seen better days. Infighting, rebellions, and feudal lords taxing the ever-living shit out of the population did very little to improve their PR image, and this is without the British Empire knocking on their door. By this time in history, the British had developed an insatiable craving for Chinese tea, so to pay for this expensive new luxury, the motherland had come up with a brilliant idea. The British would simply get the entire region addicted to opium and serve as their sole supplier, giving them plenty of coin for both tea and whatever the fuck else they might want from their eastern neighbors. When one disgruntled Chinese official decided that this was a pretty fucked up thing to do, they burned an entire shipment of the stuff, which didn't go down well for the boys in red. The British East India Company, the largest drug cartel in human history at the time, sailed their enormous fleet up the Yangtze River and demanded a very polite discussion with the cheeky motherfucker who disrupted their drug trade. The subsequent Opium Wars would lead to the British absolutely raffle stomping their Chinese rivals, which led to China handing over a fuck ton of silver, granting the British priority trading rights, and making British nationals immune from Chinese law. The British would also go on to occupy and later lease the entire region of Hong Kong for the next 99 years, which long-time viewers would know sparked a whole new sequence of problems in and of themselves, but that's not a story for today. The Qing dynasty was weak, embarrassed, universally hated, and only one brilliant idea away from being overthrown. Here's how one man would cause the second bloodiest conflict in world history. This is where we meet the protagonist of our story, a young man by the name of Hong Xiuquan. Born in 1814, Hong led somewhat of an unexceptional life. His family's level of wealth wasn't exactly that of a highborn member of society, but at the same time, they also didn't resemble those Monty Python peasants who were perpetually covered in shit. His family had enough money to educate Hong to one day join the elite rank of civil servants, who at the time held prestigious positions among the Qing government. Civil servants would act as bureaucrats and administrators and would receive perks such as a cushy job, fine rice wine, and their pick of the fine palace bitches. For a guy like Hong, no other life was worth living. The problem was that the civil service examinations were really fucking hard. In order to pass, applicants would be required to study a number of antiquated philosophical, moral, and ethical writings, made up of a bunch of texts attributed to Confucius himself, but written by fuck knows who. The examinations were designed to keep low-born degenerates from passing, as only families who could afford to educate their sons in the complicated nuances of the ancient Chinese language could ever hope to join the prestigious ranks of civil servants. When Hong was around 13 years old, he visited the port of Canton to take the entry exams for his dream job, a place which, as a result of the Opium Wars, was now home to a large and thriving Western population. It was here when our young protagonist would run into some Christian missionaries looking to spread the teaching of Jesus in this far-off eastern land. Hong was given a pamphlet titled "Our Good Works for Exhorting the Age," which emphasized the coming of the end times, an idea which strangely had precedent in Chinese thought from earlier centuries. Years passed, and Hong tried time after time to pass the exams to achieve his lifelong goal of becoming a civil servant. 10 years after first receiving the Christian pamphlet and failing for the 5th time to become a civil servant, he finally broke. Like less than 100 years later, when an Austrian man with a funny mustache was rejected from pursuing his simple artistic dream, this 5th rejection would devastate the course of history forever. Hong Xiuquan fell into a deep dark depression. Hong took to his bed and shut himself off from the world. For weeks he would remain alone, with the pressure of the world bearing down on his failure, which would then warp into an extreme fever. Hong would eventually slip into a fever dream, and in the state of being absolutely off his fucking chops, he'd find a new purpose for his life. Hong would be transported from this earth and lifted into the heavens. There, he would be met with 2 men, one with a golden beard and robes emblazoned with the royal dragon insignia of the emperors of China, who he knew to be the Almighty God. The other, donning a black beard and slightly less impressive robe, was Jesus H. Christ. Hong came to understand that he was the younger brother of Jesus and the Chinese Son of God, who was tasked with bringing the word of the Lord to his homeland. In his mind, both the meddling foreigners and the Qing dynasty had overtaken and shamed the proud Chinese kingdom, and it was his divine duty to rid the nation of their negative influence. This out-of-body fever dream would stick with him until his mid-30s, when he and his since-formed merry band of Christian rebels would start to destroy and deface a number of shrines and statues, and in these humble beginnings would sprout a movement. Hong would go on to preach about the equality of man and the fast-approaching end times, which found an eager audience among a seemingly limitless number of peasants who were displaced, impoverished, and very often addicted to opium. Hong was a charismatic man who could take every sliver of anger and discontent among the peasantry and point it toward the Qing dynasty, who he believed to be the downfall of a once great kingdom. By the year 1850, Hong had formed a peasant army. The revolution had begun. Early major uprisings in Xishan and Yang'an would spur a rapid recruitment drive for what was now being called the Heavenly Army of Great Peace, but after thousands of new members would soon understand, the future of China would be anything but peaceful, as there was no fucking way our boy Hong could personally manage such a large influx of people. He would appoint 4 kings to rule under him. The first was the King of the East, a man who doubled as the voice of God. He would be the mouthpiece of the Lord himself, able to create laws as he pleased, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, this power would eventually fuck up everything. As for the others, the King of the West mostly had the same skill tree as his counterpart in the East. The King in the South would be the head of the advanced guard of Hong's forces, and the King in the North would go on to fight Ramsay Bolton in the Battle of the Bastards. The rebellious movement didn't resemble anything that came before, having adopted teachings of both the Old and New Testament, while also throwing in some traditional Confucian values for shits and giggles. Not only this, but although both men and women were free to fight and die side by side on the battlefield, they would be forbidden to fornicate under any circumstances, even if they were man and wife. Obviously, as they were busy fighting a war, Hong was too busy to act as the universal horny police, but even bastard children were given names like Jade and Snow, but enough with the Game of Thrones references. In 1852, 2 years after the formation of Hong's army, the King of the South, the head of the advanced army, and the founder of Hong's original Christian scallywags, is killed while marching past the province of Guangzhou. In a universally recognized terrible move, Hong would retaliate by taking his troops and slaughtering the entire city. Qing forces now saw Hong's army as a serious threat, and in retaliation, would ambush them shortly after, leaving 10,000 dead. Hong's army would briefly go into hiding, until the King of the West would decide to preemptively attack the province of Jiangxi, which would also result in his death. Despite losing half of his kings, Hong's armies would go on to capture the city of Nanjing, the southern capital of China, which would serve as a big middle finger to the Qing, who were yet to topple his momentum. The next step was to take Beijing, and finally purge the Qing from Hong's proud homeland. By this time, Hong had become even more grandiose, seeing the Qing dynasty as not simply a scourge on China, but as being directly influenced by demons from hell who have infiltrated the monarchy. We would later find out that they would instead serve as executives for Nestle. Speaking of massive dicks, statistically, most viewers watching probably have one, but this doesn't mean that it couldn't be even more impressive. With Manscaped's Performance Package Kit, you'll have everything you need to get yourself ready for that special someone and give you enough confidence to plunge your own country into a long and bloody civil war. The Crop Preserver will be able to keep your sack fresher than the corpse of your newly slain enemies. The Weed Whacker will keep those nose hairs more absent than Hong's graduation certificate. And the Shears 2.0 will keep those nails tidier than Beijing's Forbidden City. The flagship of the pack is the Lawnmower 3.0, which is a waterproof trimmer, said to be quieter than a ninja and more delicate than the Emperor's concubines. You never know when your wang might be expecting company, but with Manscaped, you'll always be ready for a surprise doctor's appointment, that special someone, or just a fun get together with the homies. As always, checking out with the code on screen will get you 2 free gifts, 20% off, and free international shipping. Manscaped, don't say Uncle Swag never did anything for your penis. At this point, you might think that this insane level of self-importance wrapped up in crazy conspiracy theories would scare away any hope of gaining new followers, but viewers who have paid any attention to our news series over the last few years will know better. Hong's army would soon balloon to an incredible 1 million strong, which would mostly be made up of poor starving peasants who saw this as a far more favorable alternative to a weak government who would let metric shit tons of drugs into their borders. A war on this scale was previously unseen in all of human history and would not be outdone until the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts rejected the wrong fucking shouty Austrian. According to much smarter people who study this shit for a living, funny mustache man, Hong Xiuquan, and a great number of charismatic egomaniacs who came before tend to have a lot in common. The conditions of their rise to power usually stem from economic turmoil, cultural upheaval, and an outside boogeyman. For our Charlie Chaplin look-alike, this was a mixture of the Great Depression, Germany's tattered identity after the First World War, and the unfortunate Jewish population who were caught in the crossfire. Similarly, the Taiping Rebellion was born out of a lack of economic opportunity for Chinese peasants, Hong's egalitarian ideology, and both foreign powers, and the out-of-touch Qing being painted as sinister demons. Hong was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time, and when looking at all other evolutions since the beginning of time, he was inevitable. After Hong's Christian boy band took Nanjing, their army got more followers than a hot tub streamer with a nice set of opinions on Venezuelan tax reform. This rightfully scared the absolute shit out of the Qing, who did the equivalent of light the beacons to call Gondor for aid. The Qing essentially told all their subordinate warlords and underlings to meet down mid, and like a typical Greek man in times of strife, calling his 600 cousins in their shiny purple Subarus, the Green Standard Army was formed. With the magic of raising taxes, the Qing army had well-paid, well-fed, and well-trained recruits, and was ready to make use of its far superior leadership to find the Taiping Rebellion and pour their fucking cornflakes. The best part was that the leader of the Green Standard Army, General Zheng Gufan, passed the civil servant exams on his very first try. The 1860s would see the Taiping Rebellion make a move on Shanghai, a city with a high proportion of Western citizens. The commanders of the Taiping army were confident that since the British were also predominantly Christian, they would serve as valuable trade partners instead of the Qing. However, once the British finally met with Hong and saw how insane the motherfucker had become, they instead decided to form a militia and directly fight against the Taiping army. Things only got worse for the rebellion. By the year 1856, Beijing was still unconquered, and after the king in the north was sick of the East King and mouthpiece of God talking shit, he made the executive decision to kill him to death. The king in the north would then get himself captured, leaving exactly none of the original directional kings left under Hong. After becoming increasingly paranoid, Hong decided to only appoint members of his own family to these key positions of power, not the wisest decision, considering how dogshit they were at commanding an army now numbering 2 million people. Hong and his army would remain on the defensive until the conclusion of the 14-year war, which would result in the deaths of anywhere between 20 to 100 million people. The Qing offensive successfully took town after town back from the rebellion until on the 1st of June, 1864, Hong Xiuquan, the heavenly king and God's Chinese son, would meet his end. Accounts on his death are conflicting, with some suggesting that upon seeing no way out of the besieged city of Nanjing, he took his own life in the company of his large and extensive harem. Other accounts tell that as supplies within the city started to run low, Hong began to eat wild berries and plants, causing him to contract a deadly case of dysentery. Whatever the case, the leaderless rebellion quickly crumbled, with the remaining troops either being captured and put to death, or fucking off to join other rebellions who had yet to be put down. The legacy of Hong is a complicated one for historians to properly grasp. In many ways, he popularized ideas that were incredibly rare during the period, such as equal rights, protections for women, labor laws, and the entire concept of public land. On the other hand, Hong's policies were often regressive, or even outright absurd, such as the prohibition of all intercourse, and the burning of thousands of Confucian scrolls and texts. In many ways, Hong popularized the political ideology that would find its way to China nearly a century later, founded by some bearded German guy named Karl. Despite Hong's ultimate goal of making China great again, the 14-year conflict within the kingdom did nothing but cripple the nation for the next 100 years. By the turn of the 20th century, China was fractured into regions controlled by local hegemons, warlords, who didn't care for things as boring as political philosophy. Fast forward even further, through a 2-year-old Qing emperor, a Japanese invasion, and yet another civil war, and you finally come to a united China in 1943, when the leader of China's Communist Party, Mao Zedong, took control over the long fractured nation. However, like that scene from Megamind, the country wasn't exactly free, rather, under new management. The heavenly mandate to rule was now over. Chairman Mao quite famously said, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun," meaning there would be no more civil service exams, the study of the ancient Chinese language, or the study of moral philosophy as a prerequisite to rule. Mao's policies would later lead to the deaths of an estimated 45 million people, further giving weight to his harsh political philosophy of the most violent always being the most fit to rule. To believe this would be to miss the entire point of the exams, this story, and what it means to be a good leader in the first place. Hong Xiuquan was smarter and better than everyone else, and started the biggest revolution the world had ever seen, which is exactly why he failed those exams. For a dynasty to have the mandate of heaven, it must have humility, compassion, respect, and the utmost care for China and her people. After killing so many millions in an attempt to create a better China, it's a wonder why he ever thought he could pass those fucking exams in the first place. The rigorous tests were there to stop unhinged motherfuckers from ever rising to any position of power, but unfortunately for everyone in the country, Hong Xiuquan knew one simple loophole that the Qing dynasty didn't want them to know about. Get yourself some Manscaped, hit the bell or some shit, roll the outro.